Picture this, the year is 1621, the location is the American continent, and we have some newly arrived British colonists that are coming in to colonize the American continent. They are approached by this local Indian who asks them in perfectly fluent English, "Do you have beer?" Well, that's certainly unusual, isn't it? This week we're going in reverse. I gave you the ending of the story. Now it's time to go back and figure out what happened and why. We're talking about the curious case of Squanto, the local Indian who spoke perfect English. Welcome to Vlogs of Knowledge. This is a really interesting story with a lot of coincidences, and as I was researching this week's topic, I came across the story of Squanto. I was really intrigued about who this guy was and what his story was all about. So as always, let's put all this in historical context and get some background. Squanto, or Tisquantum by his real name, was a Native American from the Patuxet tribe who acted as a sort of interpreter and guide to some settlers in Plymouth, Massachusetts. The settlers, they were pilgrims, people who traveled for religious reasons, and they were one of the very first colonists of America. They arrived in the winter of 1620 and they were unprepared to say the least for the very cold conditions of the American continent. That first winter, they only stayed on their boat, like you couldn't really colonize, it was just too cold, nothing could grow, you had to stay on your boat. During that winter, they met Squanto, the boy who spoke perfect English. And Squanto, he acted as a translator, as a guide to both tribes, both the English colonists and also the local tribes, and it was literally the best thing that could have happened to the English colonists at the time. Squanto helped them trade with the local Indians, he assured them of his good intentions and that of his tribe, and he also helped them build their very first settlement so that they could be ready for the spring. But I'm sure you're all asking the question, who is Squanto and why did he speak such good English? Well, I'm glad that you asked, but for that we have to go back a few years. In my History of Canada videos, we talked about how Britain came to the American continent to start colonizing around the 16th century. But colonization is not the only thing that they did. They also took the local American Indians, brought them back to Europe as slaves to be sold off for a profit. It's what Christopher Columbus did and what Europe was about to do on a massive scale for about 400 years. For more information on that, be sure to check out the video that I did on the transatlantic slave trade. According to some historians, in the year 1605, when Squanto was just a little boy, he was taken away and brought back to Europe because they thought that Europeans might want to see what an actual Indian looks like. Although we don't really know if this ever happened. He supposedly spent about 9 years in England before returning to the American colonies. Unfortunately for Squanto, he somehow managed to get captured once again and he was sent over to Europe for the second time, but this time to be sold off as a slave to the Spanish. We know very little about Squanto's life in general. According to the records that we have, there's evidence to believe that he may have never been captured the first time, but that's for you to research on your own. I've gone ahead and put some links in the description where you can start. Somehow from Spain, he made his way back to England. He met with a merchant that was involved in the project to explore and settle Newfoundland, part of the American continent. He spent a few years with that merchant and eventually found himself once again on a ship heading towards the American continent. What a traveler, this guy. Keep in mind that Squanto had now been taken away from his family for about 15 years. Although he came to the American continent a few times, he never had a chance to visit them. Every time he came, he was captured and sent back to Europe, which is kind of unfortunate to be honest. So naturally, on this trip, he made it his personal mission to go back to his home village and reunite with his family. However, what he didn't know is that in 1617, while he was still back in England, a terrible outbreak of smallpox had spread and killed everybody in the village. Not one person was left alive. When Squanto came back to his home village, he was devastated to find out nothing had remained. His loved ones, his family, his friends were all gone. Crippled with sadness, he moved to a neighboring village, lived with them, and even helped them manage the village. That tribe was called the Wampanoag tribe, and if you're American, that should be familiar because that was the tribe that was involved in the very first Thanksgiving. I didn't mention it, but this story is directly linked to the beginning of Thanksgiving, so let's find out how. Let's go back to the pilgrims who were having trouble to adjust to the American winter. Like, if we're being honest, they came severely underprepared. Like, not only did they just come out of a several week journey that was long and very difficult, but they also chose to come at the beginning of winter. Like, really, you couldn't pick a better time. You had to come at the beginning of winter. Like, come on. From a colonial standpoint, things were pretty bad. Like, the local Indians, it was good that they were there, sure, but you never really knew if they wanted to be friends with you or if they wanted to kill you. And it was even worse when you saw that they had things that you could trade with, but you couldn't really have a way to communicate with them. Well, this is where Squanto comes into the equation. Having spent most of his life abroad, he was fluent in English and even knew some Spanish from having lived in Spain for a couple of years. But he remained a local Indian. He was like the perfect piece of the puzzle between the English and the local Indians. He became a translator, he became a guide, and just really wanted to help the American colonists. Like, perhaps if he wasn't there, things would have turned out drastically different. He facilitated trade between the two groups, he helped the colonists settle, and even assured both parties of their mutual good intentions. And that's what I meant with the coincidences. Like Squanto, he was captured twice, he made several trips back and forth to Europe and the American continent, and he ended up at the same starting point, his home territory. And coincidence had it that the Pilgrim settlers chose that territory to make their first settlement. And out of that, you get the very first Thanksgiving. Like, come on. So far, I've painted you a pretty good picture of Squanto, but the truth is that he wasn't all that good. Like, he wasn't bad, but he wasn't 100% good either. I'm sure that you can agree that being the translator between two powerful tribes will give you some power as well. You can kind of control their conversation. Squanto realized the power that he had, and he started to exaggerate his status among the colonies to his local tribe. Like, he made it seem like the colonists loved him and put him on a high pedestal, which really wasn't the case. And he also lied that the colonists had a sort of plague underground that they could release at any moment that could kill everybody if they wanted to. Like, makes no sense. Some of his deceptions were discovered while others were not, and Squanto's reputation took a big hit, and even some people wanted to see him die, but nobody killed him because, well, he was just so useful to the tribe. Like all people, Squanto eventually died, but he never died of old age. In fact, his death comes shortly after the story I just told you. While he was still a guide and interpreter for the English colonists, in 1622 he led an expedition across the forest to trade with a different local tribe. He unfortunately got sick and died a few days later. Squanto lived a very short but meaningful life. His unfortunate capture led him across the ocean, taught him English, and eventually made him a very valuable asset to both the American colonists and the local Indians. Unfortunately, no human is perfect, and we can see that by him trying to use his advantage to gain influence. And as for Thanksgiving, well, the tribe that he was living with was the same tribe that the colonists wanted to give a surplus of food to after a successful harvest in the fall of 1621, thus starting the very first Thanksgiving. No records really survive of who attended or what kind of food was served, but chances are that Squanto was there. So that was the story of Squanto. His capture was unfortunate, sure, but in the end it worked out well for everybody. Except for the fact that Squanto kind of just died from disease, but let's ignore that. If you've enjoyed this video, please leave it a big like, share it to a friend, and make sure to click that subscribe button. And now it's time for questions. What was your favorite part of the story? Do you believe that he was captured that many times? And did you know that he was involved in Thanksgiving? I would love to know, so please leave me a comment, and bonus points for you. If you do leave a comment, you might get featured in next week's video as a fan of the week. As you know, and as I say at the end of every video, I haven't talked about everything, and the things that I did talk about, I haven't gone into too much detail. That's okay, I'm actually doing this on purpose because I want you guys to go out and research on your own. My name has been Darius Costin. You can follow me on social media, the links will be in the description, and also make sure to check out my second channel where you get to see behind the scenes of everything that I do on this channel. Link in the description. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I will see you all next week.